Imagine you're walking down a busy city street, briefcase in hand, mind sharp and focused on high-stakes business deals, when out of nowhere, a scrappy little dog with ragged fur and fierce determination leaps out and snatches your briefcase, sprinting away before you can react. Now pause right there, because what would you do? Would you chase the dog? Would you call security or brush it off as a bizarre prank? This isn't just a story about a wealthy businessman and a mischievous dog. It's a story about how life sometimes takes the most unexpected turn to give us exactly what we didn't know we needed, and how moments that seem random can transform lives forever. David, the central figure in our tale, is a self-made billionaire, a Lagos business mogul known for his sharp mind and relentless drive. He had everything anyone could dream of: luxury cars, global investments, a designer wardrobe, and a name that commanded respect in every boardroom he walked into. But behind his polished exterior was a man disconnected from the rawness of life. So when this unkempt little dog came hurtling out of nowhere, stole his briefcase, and darted into a crumbling building, something stirred in David. Something curious. Something human. He chased after the dog, partly out of irritation, partly out of instinct, but mostly because the whole situation felt like it was pulling him towards something bigger. When he stepped into the dark, decrepit building, expecting maybe a homeless encampment or a scam operation, he instead found something that froze him in place. Lying unconscious on the cold, dusty floor was a malnourished girl no older than 10, frail and dirty, barely breathing, her thin arms curled around her belly. And right beside her sat the dog that had stolen his briefcase, now licking her cheek as if trying to wake her up. It wasn't theft. It was a cry for help. And suddenly the whole scene shifted. This wasn't a dog behaving wildly. This was a desperate guardian who had used the only tool he had to save someone he loved. David's instincts kicked in. He picked the girl up, cradled her gently in his arms, and ran to his car. The dog jumped in beside him. No hesitation, no fear, just fierce loyalty. The hospital staff sprang into action as soon as he arrived. David insisted that the dog be allowed to stay in the room, that he had found the girl because of him, and the girl eventually woke up weak, disoriented, but safe. The doctors said she had been severely dehydrated and malnourished, likely hadn't eaten in days, but she was alive thanks to that dog and to David, who had chosen to follow, rather than dismiss the strange event that led him to her. And let's take a moment to reflect on this real-world parallel, because sometimes help arrives in forms we don't recognize. A story from Los Angeles comes to mind, where a stray pit bull led firefighters to a burning abandoned house where a toddler had been trapped. The firefighters didn't believe the dog at first, but it barked and ran in circles until someone followed that child lived, because a creature many fear became a hero. And in our story, Jack, the name the girl later gave the dog, is more than a pet. He is a symbol of resilience and trust. And let's not forget David, whose life was about to change forever, because he didn't walk away. Now the girl who said her name was Naomi had no one to contact. No guardian, no emergency numbers. Her voice trembled as she recounted her parents' death in a car crash and how she'd been forced to live with an uncle who withheld food and education. She had been abused, ignored, and nearly erased by a world too busy to care. So she ran away with the only companion she trusted, Jack, and ended up in that building waiting for help that may never have come, if not for that one impulsive dog. And the billionaire who chose to follow David made the quick but powerful decision to take both Naomi and Jack into his home, not as a charity case, but because he felt a responsibility not just to her, but to the man he had once been years ago when he was poor, forgotten, and nearly broken. Someone had helped him, and though he never got to pay that kindness back, he now saw a chance to pay it forward. And this moment speaks volumes about empathy, about what we do when we have the means to make a difference, and whether we're willing to act when no one is watching. David's mansion became a strange but beautiful mix of contrast. The polished marble floors now bore paw prints. The silence of wealth broken by Naomi's laughter and the comforting shuffle of Jack's paws. And let's stop and ask ourselves, what would we do in David's position? Would we take that leap? Would we risk ridicule or inconvenience to help someone simply because it was the right thing to do? And that's the essence of the story, that unexpected encounters can unearth a depth of humanity that even the richest lifestyle can't provide. It's about learning that our Purpose often finds us when we stop chasing success and start noticing suffering. David didn't just find a child and a dog. He found a piece of himself that had long been buried under years of ambition, and now that it had resurfaced, nothing would ever be the same again. As Naomi recovered and slowly adjusted to life inside David's luxurious mansion, it became clear that this wasn't going to be a short-term situation. David had expected to help her get back on her feet, maybe find a distant relative or enroll her in a foster program, but each time he looked at her or saw Jack curl up protectively by her side, he felt something shift deep inside him. Naomi reminded him of his younger self, lost, uncertain, but holding on with a stubborn kind of hope. He remembered being hungry not just for food, but for stability, for someone to say, "I see you and I care." And when his own life had seemed impossibly hard, there had been one man who changed it all. Emeka Evans, a name David hadn't spoken aloud in years, the man who paid for his university education when no one else believed in him. The man who helped him attend business school in the UK without asking for anything in return. It had always felt like a miracle, like grace when he didn't deserve it, and now grace had a face. Naomi's because a few weeks into her stay, a social worker traced her identity and confirmed that Naomi Evans was the daughter of Emeka, the very man David owed everything to. It was as if fate had orchestrated this reunion across time and circumstance. David was shaken to his core, not by guilt, but by gratitude the universe had given him a chance to give back. Not just in theory, but in a way that truly mattered in raising Naomi, protecting her, loving her the way her father would have wanted. And when David shared this story with his elderly mother, known lovingly as Mama David, she was quiet for a long time. Then she placed a hand on Naomi's head and said, "You're home now, child. Your father once lifted up my son, and now we lift you up as our own from that moment forward." Naomi became family not through paperwork, but through love, through shared history and deliberate acts of care. And Naomi flourished in this environment. She went from being withdrawn and timid to vibrant, curious, and full of life. She started school again, excelled in math and literature, and even took up painting. Her drawings often featured a girl, a dog, and a big house with sunbeams pouring through the windows, a far cry from the cold shadows of her past, but not everyone was thrilled with this new addition to David's life. Enter Natasha, David's longtime fiancée, a woman who had grown used to a life of spotlighted luxury and tight social circles. Natasha had never shown much interest in charity or children. Her idea of giving back involved Instagram posts and auction galas. So when David told her about Naomi, she forced a smile, said the right things, but behind the scenes she fumed. She saw Naomi as a threat, not just to her relationship with David, but to her image. She didn't understand why a billionaire like David would invest his time in a child with no status or pedigree. She complained to friends who fueled her resentment, telling her that this was just a phase that David would come to his senses. But the more she watched David interact with Naomi, the more she felt her grip loosening, and that scared her one day. While David was away on a business trip, Natasha made an unannounced decision to move into the mansion, claiming she wanted to play a more active role in the family dynamic. What followed was a subtle campaign of manipulation and cruelty. She began by locking Jack outside, claiming he was dirty and didn't belong in the house. She then told Naomi she had to eat in the kitchen instead of with the adults, quietly separating her from the family space. And when Naomi protested, Natasha responded with cold authority, saying, "I'm going to be your new mother and you'll respect that. Or you can go back to the streets." And these aren't just fictional devices. We see this kind of psychological abuse all too often in real-life foster and blended families, where power dynamics go unchecked and where the vulnerable fall through the cracks. But Naomi was not completely alone. The household staff, especially Ada, the head maid, had taken a strong liking to Naomi. Ada had grown up in a tough environment herself, and she knew the signs of manipulation. She saw Naomi's appetite fade, her eyes dim, her school grades drop, and she watched as Natasha began spending the tuition money on designer bags and spa days instead of sending it to the school. David had already wired the funds, but Natasha intercepted the emails, deleted updates, and silenced the phone calls from Naomi's teachers saying that David was unreachable and couldn't take calls. But Ada had had enough. She gently pulled Naomi aside one day and said, "Don't worry, child. Truth never stays buried. I see you, and soon he will too. And Ada was right, because secrets don't stay hidden, especially in a house covered with security cameras. And as Naomi's sadness grew, so did Jack's unease. The loyal dog refused to leave her side, even after being pushed, locked out, and screamed at by Natasha. His presence was her lifeline. And every time he nudged her hand or licked away her tears, it was a reminder that love, real love, does not abandon. And this dynamic is something many underestimate. In real-life studies show that emotional support animals significantly improve recovery in children facing trauma. Dogs like Jack play a role far beyond companionship. They become protectors and silent healers. And that's exactly what Jack was for Naomi, a four-legged guardian sent not to entertain, but to defend. And while Natasha plotted and posed, the clock was ticking, because David was about to learn the truth in the most unexpected way possible. It was a cold Monday morning when the first clue broke through the fog of manipulation. A letter from Naomi's school addressed directly to David arrived by courier, slipping past Natasha's grasp. The head teacher had written a concerned note explaining Naomi's prolonged absences and unpaid tuition. Despite prior confirmations of payment, David was baffled. He knew for a fact he had transferred a full year's fees. He had even double-checked the receipt weeks earlier. He immediately called the school to confirm the issue, and when they explained that repeated attempts to contact him had failed, something in his gut twisted. It didn't add up. His trusted assistant hadn't mentioned any calls, nor had he seen any emails. That evening he sat alone in his study, replaying Naomi's recent behavior in his mind. Her quieter tone, her loss of appetite, the way Jack had started growling anytime Natasha entered the room. At first, David had dismissed these things as part of a new dynamic, but now the puzzle pieces were forming a clearer picture, and the final nudge came from Ada, who carefully knocked on his door holding a flash drive and a heavy heart. She said, "Sir, I think it's time you see the truth on this." She had compiled CCTV footage from the house showing Natasha's behavior over the past few weeks. David inserted the flash drive into his laptop and watched in silence as the screen revealed everything. Natasha yelling at Naomi, grabbing her arm, pushing Jack aside with her foot, using David's card to shop online, while Naomi sat in her room in silence. The videos were damning, and more than that, they were heartbreaking. David sat frozen, a cocktail of rage, guilt, and sorrow rising in his chest. He had failed Naomi, the very girl whose father once gave him a future. He had allowed his fiancée to turn his home into a prison for a child who had already lost too much. And it's in moments like this that real character is forged, not in wealth or applause, but in how we respond when we realize we've been blind to someone else's pain. David called Ada into the room and said thank you for protecting her, and then quietly walked upstairs where Naomi lay curled up beside Jack. He gently placed a hand on her shoulder. She stirred, opened her eyes and looked at him, unsure whether to smile or hide. He said, "I'm so sorry, baby girl. I didn't see what was happening, but I do now, and I promise you from this moment forward, I will never let anyone hurt you again." Naomi's lip trembled, and then she threw her arms around him, crying, not because she was scared, but because she was finally safe. And the next morning, everything changed. David asked Natasha to leave his home immediately and permanently. She argued, protested, played victim, but David was unmoved. He had seen the truth, and there was no undoing it. He didn't shout. He didn't insult her. He simply looked her in the eye and said, "Your chapter in my life is over. I pray you learn what love actually means." As she left, Naomi watched from the balcony, her hand resting on Jack's head, who stood proudly by her side. Tail still, but gaze locked forward, as if he too knew the storm had passed. The days that followed were filled with healing. Naomi returned to school with new books, a fresh uniform, and the loudest cheer from her classmates who had missed her. Laughter and curiosity, David walked her to class himself, carrying her backpack and telling every teacher thank you for watching over her when I failed to do so. And here's something important. This moment isn't just a conclusion, it's a reflection of how we can all miss the signs of suffering, especially when they come wrapped in silence. Not every cry for help is loud sometimes. It's in a quiet glance, in a lowered gaze, in a loyal dog refusing to leave a child's side. And Jack, the hero of this story, remained ever vigilant, ever loyal. David arranged for him to have his own space in the house. a little dog bed custom-made with a plaque above that read Guardian and Grace. Because Jack didn't just guard Naomi, he reminded everyone in that house what grace looks like. And that's something we can all learn from grace, is when you offer protection without praise, when you stay even when mistreated, when you choose love, not because it's easy, but because someone else's life depends on it. And Naomi blossomed. Again, her laughter returned, her curiosity grew. She began painting again, this time with vibrant colors. Field skies, stars always accompanied by a dog with golden eyes. And David sat with her each evening, reading stories, sharing meals and giving her what every child deserves: consistency, presence, and love. And let's not forget Mama David, who often said, children don't just need toys and tuition, they need time and truth. And she made sure Naomi got both, sitting with her on the porch, telling stories of when David was a mischievous boy, reminding her that every strong woman begins as a brave little girl. The transformation was visible, but more importantly, it was internal. Naomi started believing again, not just in others, but in herself and David too, transformed not in status, but in soul. He was no longer just a billionaire. He was a father, a protector, and a man who had learned that success without service is hollow, in power without compassion is noise. And in the final chapter of this journey, David didn't just rebuild his home, he expanded its heart. He created a foundation in Naomi's name, focused on protecting children from abusive households, providing shelter, education, and therapy services. He named it the Jack and Naomi Foundation, and its motto was simple: every child deserves a champion. And when asked by reporters why he was doing it, he answered, because someone once believed in me when I had nothing, and now I get to believe in someone else. Because that's what life is about: lifting others the way we were lifted, the way we wished we had been. And in doing so, creating a cycle of healing instead of harm. After Natasha was removed from their lives and David took full guardianship of Naomi, life inside the mansion began to bloom again. Not in the way it once had, with quiet, sterile perfection, but in a more meaningful, messy, warm kind of way. Naomi returned to school with confidence, her classmates welcomed her back, and her teachers marveled at her resilience. Jack was reinstated not just as a house pet, but as an honorary member of the household staff, complete with a custom dog bed in David's office and a little plaque that read, Chief Security Officer Jack. But the real transformation was in David himself. Once a man driven by numbers and headlines, now a father in every sense of the word. He wasn't just paying school fees or hiring therapists. He was showing up for breakfast every morning, walking Naomi to school when he could, helping her with homework, learning what she loved, and listening when she needed to cry or talk, or just sit in silence together. And that's something we don't often emphasize enough in stories of parenthood or mentorship. The power of presence, not perfection. Presence, showing up consistently, is what heals, not grand gestures, not expensive toys, just being there. David also became more involved in community work. He used Naomi's story to fuel change, launching a foundation in Amika Evans's name to support abused and neglected children in Nigeria. The foundation built temporary shelters, created programs for emotional recovery, and offered scholarships to girls who had dropped out due to similar trauma. He spoke publicly about the importance of seeing the unseen, listening when children say they're afraid, and trusting our instincts when something feels wrong. He even started writing a book, not about business, but about redemption: how a man known for stock market moves and real estate ventures found his soul again by following a dog down an alley. And real-life parallels began pouring in: letters from families who found hope in his story, testimonies from young girls who named their rescued dogs Jack, parents who said they started watching more closely, listening more fully. And in these ripple effects, we see the quiet revolution that compassion can start one life saved leads to 10 more. And those 10 go on to save 100. It is exponential healing. And it began with a briefcase and a bark. And if we take a wider lens on this story, it reminds us of how interwoven our lives truly are. How small actions often spark the greatest changes. David could have ignored. The dog walked past, assumed it was nonsense. Instead, he chose curiosity, then empathy, then commitment. And in doing so, he rewrote the script of his life from a solitary billionaire to a father and advocate. And while this transformation wasn't sudden or smooth, it was real, it was earned, and it had depth, not performative kindness, but everyday love, like sitting in the rain during Naomi's soccer match, cheering the loudest, like staying up late to build a school project with her out of recycled materials, like keeping Jack's water bowl full and warm in the winter. And now their family had rhythm laughter, dinner routines, evening prayers, occasional disagreements, and that grounding that only comes from genuine connection. Naomi continued to thrive. She was named school ambassador for Anti-Bullying Week, painted a mural at the community center that featured a dog and a little girl holding hands, and wrote an essay about trust that was published in the local paper titled, "How My Dog Saved My Life." And in that essay, she said, "Sometimes people look the other way, but dogs never do. Jack saw me and wouldn't let the world forget me. He barked and barked until someone came, and that someone stayed." That line stuck with David, who kept a copy of it framed on his office wall as a daily reminder to pay attention, to see those who are invisible, to keep barking in his own way. And that's the message here for all of us, whether we're David's, Naomi's, Jack's, or even bystanders. We are all called to notice, to act, to love, not with conditions or expectations, but with the kind of fierce loyalty that says, "I won't let you be forgotten." And when the anniversary of Naomi's rescue came around, David planned something special. He took her back to the building where he had first found her, now transformed into a vibrant art center funded by his foundation. The exterior was repainted, the inside filled with color, music, and joy, and on one wall stood a massive mural of a man, a dog, and a girl above it. The words were written in bold letters, "Love always finds a way." And as Naomi walked through the building, her hand holding tightly to David's and Jack trotting beside them, she whispered, "This place doesn't feel scary anymore." And David replied, "That's because you changed it just by surviving, and now others will have a place to begin again too." And in that moment, the full circle of healing was complete. Not because their journey was perfect, but because it was honest, built on shared pain, turned into shared purpose. And the power of that kind of healing is something no amount of wealth or fame can buy. It is born of empathy, nurtured by courage, and sustained by community. As the years passed, the story of David, Naomi, and Jack became more than a personal narrative. It became a symbol, a living testament to the idea that lives can be rebuilt when love is present, that family is not always about bloodlines, but about the choices we make every day, and that the most powerful rescues in life are mutual. Because while Naomi had been saved, David too had been rescued from a life that, though wealthy, had been quietly hollow with each passing season. Naomi grew into a bright, strong young woman, her artwork gaining attention beyond the community. She spoke at national youth summits, telling her story not with bitterness, but with strength, showing others that being broken once does not mean you are unworthy of being whole again. And Jack, though growing older in years, remained a constant by her side through every milestone, every tear, every triumph. And his fur, now flecked with gray, still carried the same fierce loyalty and gentle wisdom. David expanded the foundation further, opening a rehabilitation school named Grace House, where children and teenagers from all backgrounds could find refuge and rediscover hope. It offered not just education, but therapy, vocational training, and mentorship, drawing on the very principles that had helped Naomi heal. And every new student who walked through its gates was greeted by a large statue of Jack, standing tall on a pedestal with a plaque that read, "The dog who barked for the forgotten." And this wasn't just about honoring a pet. It was about acknowledging that even those considered least by society can be the key to someone else's salvation, and that in every creature there is a spark of divine purpose. David often reflected on this during his morning walks through the garden he had created in the back of the mansion. It had started as a personal retreat, but over time it evolved into a communal space where survivors came to meditate, journal, or simply sit in silence among blooming lilies and winding paths. And in that garden was a bench where David would sit every evening with Jack, Naomi, sometimes joining with her sketchpad in hand. It became their sanctuary, a place to be still, to breathe, and to remember that the darkest chapters of life do not define us, only what we choose to do next. David knew that his legacy would not be measured in stock prices or net worth, but in the lives changed, the trust rebuilt, the dignity restored. And that's the lesson we must take from this. Not to wait for perfection or applause to act. Not to assume someone else will step in when we see suffering. not to underestimate the power of following an unlikely guide into an uncomfortable place, because sometimes the difference between a tragedy and a triumph is one decision, one step of courage, one heart that chooses to care, and perhaps that is the real miracle. Not that Naomi survived, not that Jack found her, or that David helped, but that the three of them, despite their different worlds, different scars, and different stories, became a family that lasted not just in memory, but in mission. And when Jack finally passed away, peacefully in his sleep under the old fig tree in the garden, the grief was immense, but so was the gratitude. They buried him in the same garden with flowers, candles, and letters from the children he had unknowingly helped, and Naomi painted his grave marker herself, a soft watercolor of his silhouette against a sunrise with the words, "Your bark woke the world," and even after he was gone, his spirit lived on in every act of kindness, in every new beginning, in every child who walked through Grace House's gates and found someone waiting ready to believe in them. David made a quiet vow that day to keep barking in Jack's absence, to never stop using his voice, his platform, his resources to rescue others. And Naomi, too, took up that mission, mentoring younger girls who reminded her of herself. And one day, as she stood at the front of a packed auditorium, giving a speech titled, "The Power of One," she looked down at the front row where David sat, smiling, proud eyes shining with tears, and she said, "I once believed that people only care when they have to, but now I know some people care because they choose to, and that choice saved me, and that right there is what makes stories like this so important. They remind us that our pain can become someone else's hope, that even in moments of chaos we can find our calling, and that sometimes the thing that changes everything is not a grand miracle, but a simple act of noticing a man paying attention, a dog refusing to give up, a girl choosing to trust again. And so we end this journey not with an ending, but with a beginning, because as long as there are Naomis in the world waiting to be seen, as long as there are Jacks willing to bark for the voiceless, as long as there are Davids open to becoming more than their past, then there is hope, not the kind sold in slogans or speeches, but the kind built in backyards, hospitals, art centers, and hearts that have known pain and still choose love.